I don't usually talk about this, but I feel like I need to get it off my chest. It was supposed to be just another babysitting gig, easy money, right? The kid's parents described him as a little troublemaker with some impulse issues, but I figured how bad could it be? I mean, I've babysat for years, and I've dealt with tantrums, picky eaters, and even one kid who smeared peanut butter on the walls. I could handle anything. When I arrived, the house gave off a tired, lived-in vibe. It wasn't dirty, but it wasn't exactly spotless either. The furniture was mismatched, the walls were scuffed, and there were piles of magazines and toys in random corners. It was the kind of house where you could tell life happened maybe a little too much. The boy, Jonah, was waiting by the door when I got there. He didn't say anything, just stared at me with these unblinking dark eyes. I bent down, put on my best cheerful babysitter voice, and said, "Hi, Jonah, I'm Emily. We're going to hang out tonight." He didn't respond, just tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me. It was unsettling, but I chalked it up to shyness. Kids are weird sometimes. His mom quickly ran through the basics. No screen time after 7, dinner was in the fridge, and bedtime was at 9. She hesitated before adding, "If Jonah says anything unusual, just ignore it. He likes to test boundaries." She said it with this forced smile, like she was trying to convince herself more than me. The dad chimed in, "And don't let him out of your sight. He's creative." I laughed, thinking they were just being overly cautious. "Don't worry, I've got this." As they left, Jonah finally spoke. "They think you'll last longer than the others." It caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Nothing." Then he walked off toward the living room. "Okay, weird kid, whatever." Dinner went smoothly enough, though Jonah didn't eat much. He just pushed his food around on the plate, watching me the whole time. At one point he asked, "Have you ever seen someone die?" I nearly choked on my water. No. Why do you ask?" He shrugged again. "Just wondering." I tried to laugh it off. "Well, let's keep it that way, okay?" He didn't laugh. He just kept staring, like he was trying to figure something out about me. After dinner, I let him pick a board game. He chose one called Don't Wake the Monster. I'd never heard of it, but it looked old, like it had been sitting in the closet for decades. The illustrations were faded, and some of the pieces were missing. As we played, Jonah started humming a tune I didn't recognize. It was slow and haunting, and it made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Where'd you learn that song?" I asked. He grinned, showing a gap where one of his front teeth should have been. "You sang it." "No, I didn't," I said, laughing nervously. "Yes, you did. Just now." I brushed it off, but something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. Around 8:30, I started tidying up while Jonah played with some action figures. Or at least, that's what I thought he was doing. When I turned around, he was gone. "Jonah?" I called, checking the living room, the kitchen, and the hallway. No response. Finally, I found him in the laundry room, crouched in the corner with a knife from the kitchen drawer. My heart stopped. "Jonah, what are you doing?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He looked up at me, completely unfazed. "It's for the game. The monster needs a weapon." I took a deep breath. "Okay, well, we don't play with knives. Let's put it back, okay?" For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to listen. Then he stood up, handed me the knife, and walked past me without a word. I put the knife back in the drawer and decided to keep a closer eye on him. But when I checked the drawer a few minutes later, 3 more knives were missing. Things got worse after that. Jonah started asking more questions, each one more disturbing than the last. "What does it feel like to burn? Do you think I'd look good in a coffin? Do you believe in monsters?" By 9:15, I was ready to call his parents and tell them to come home early. But before I could, Jonah disappeared again. I found him upstairs in his parents' bedroom, rummaging through the nightstand. When I told him to stop, he slammed the drawer shut and stared at me with that same eerie grin. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. "Jonah, that's enough. Go to bed." Instead, he bolted down the stairs. I chased after him, but when I reached the bottom, the door to the laundry room slammed shut behind me. I turned the knob, but it wouldn't budge. He'd locked me in. "Jonah, this isn't funny. Let me out," I shouted. Through the door, I heard him humming that same haunting tune. Then I smelled smoke. Panic set in. I pounded on the door, screaming for Jonah to let me out. The smell of smoke grew stronger, and I could see flickers of orange light under the door. I looked around the laundry room for anything I could use to break out. My eyes landed on a wrench sitting on top of the dryer. I grabbed it and started smashing at the doorknob. It felt like an eternity, but I finally managed to break the lock. I burst into the hallway, coughing as thick black smoke filled the air. The living room was on fire. Flames were crawling up the walls, and the couch was already engulfed. Jonah stood in the middle of it all, holding a lighter in one hand and one of the missing knives in the other. "Jonah, what are you doing?" I screamed. He just smiled. "Playing the game." I ran toward him, but he darted away, heading for the stairs. I grabbed a blanket from the couch and used it to smother the flames on the carpet, creating a small path. Then I chased after Jonah, coughing and choking as the smoke thickened. I found him in his bedroom, hiding under the bed. I grabbed him and carried him out, even as he kicked and screamed, "Let me go! I want to watch it burn." The fire department arrived just in time to save the house, though the living room was a total loss. The police questioned me for hours, and when Jonah's parents finally came home, they looked more embarrassed than surprised. Turns out, Jonah had a history of violent behavior that they'd been hiding. He'd been expelled from 2 schools for starting fires, and there were rumors that he'd hurt other kids, though nothing was ever proven. They tried to apologize, but I was done. I quit babysitting after that night. No amount of money is worth what I went through. Looking back, I keep wondering if there was something I could have done differently. Some way I could have seen the warning signs sooner. But the truth is, Jonah wasn't just a troublemaker. He was dangerous, and I'm lucky I got out alive. When I was 25, I took up a babysitting job for a family in this quiet suburban neighborhood, not too far from my apartment. I needed the extra money, and I had a lot of experience with kids, so it seemed perfect. They had 2 little boys, ages 5 and 8. Both were adorable, well-behaved, and full of energy, honestly. The kind of kids any babysitter would love to watch over. The family seemed perfect on the surface. The mom, Sarah, was warm and friendly when we first met. She was one of those super polished, put-together moms who seemed like she could juggle a million things without breaking a sweat. The dad, Greg, was a little awkward, but nothing out of the ordinary at first. He mostly kept to himself, except for the occasional small talk. The first few days went smoothly. I'd show up around 4 p.m., hang out with the boys, help them with homework, make dinner, and put them to bed if Sarah and Greg were out late. The house was beautiful, modern, spacious, and impeccably clean. But as the days went by, I started noticing little things that didn't sit right with me. The first thing I noticed was the mirrors. There were a lot of them. It wasn't something that jumped out at me right away, but after a while, I realized there were mirrors in places you wouldn't expect. In my room, for instance, there were 2 big mirrors, one on the wall across from the bed, and another standing mirror in the corner. Then there was the bathroom connected to my room. The mirror above the sink seemed normal, but there was a smaller, decorative mirror mounted on the opposite wall, which felt unnecessary. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself some people just like mirrors. But then there were the misplaced items. I'd leave my phone charger on the nightstand, only to find it on the dresser, or I'd leave my sweater on the chair in my room and find it draped over the bed. I assumed maybe Sarah or the cleaning lady had moved things around, but it still felt off. Greg's behavior didn't help either. He'd linger in conversations longer than necessary, asking questions that felt a little too personal. "Do you have a boyfriend? Or do you live alone?" Harmless on the surface, but the way he'd ask made me uncomfortable. He always smiled just a bit too long, and his eye contact felt intense. One evening, Sarah mentioned they'd be out late for a dinner party. I put the boys to bed around 8:30, then went to my room to relax. I was scrolling through my phone when I noticed something strange in the bathroom mirror. There was a tiny, faint blinking light in the corner of the smaller decorative mirror. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I turned off the bathroom light and looked again. The blinking light was still there. My stomach dropped. I stepped closer, and that's when I saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible lens embedded in the mirror's frame. It was a camera. Panic set in. I felt sick. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and took a picture of the mirror. Then I started looking around the room, my heart racing. Were there more cameras? What if someone was watching me right now? I tried to stay calm and think clearly. I knew I couldn't stay there another second, but I didn't want to tip anyone off before I left. I quietly packed my bag, made sure the boys were still asleep, and called a friend to come pick me up. I didn't tell her why over the phone, I just said I needed her to get me now. Once I was out of the house and safely in my friend's car, I told her everything. She was just as horrified as I was and convinced me to go straight to the police. The police took my report seriously, especially after I showed them the photo of the hidden camera. They got a warrant to search the house and found several other hidden cameras, one in my bedroom mirror, another in the bathroom, and even one in the living room. It turns out Greg had been installing these cameras for months. Not just in my room, but in the rooms of previous babysitters as well. He'd been using the footage for God knows what. The thought of it still makes my skin crawl. Greg was arrested and charged with invasion of privacy and a slew of other offenses. Sarah filed for divorce shortly after, and I never saw or heard from her or the boys again. Even now, years later, I still feel violated when I think about it. The idea that someone had been watching me in such an intimate way, without my consent, is something I'll never fully get over. I've become hyper aware of my surroundings, always checking for hidden cameras in hotel rooms or Airbnbs. It's something I wouldn't wish on anyone. If you're babysitting or staying in someone else's home, please be careful. You never know what kind of secrets people are hiding. I was 10 years old when my parents decided to leave me and my little brother Ethan with a babysitter for the night. They were going to some overnight event, and I guess they didn't want to drag two kids along. It wasn't the first time we had a babysitter, but it was the first time we had her. I don't even remember her name anymore, but I'll never forget what happened that night. She arrived around 6, just before my parents left. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, with long black hair and this nervous energy about her. I remember thinking she was kind of pretty, but there was something off about the way she kept glancing at the front door, like she was expecting someone or something to show up. My parents gave her the usual instructions. Make sure Ethan and I ate dinner, no television after 8, and bedtime by 9:30. Then they kissed us goodbye and left. As soon as the door shut behind them, the babysitter went to the front door and locked it. Not just the lock, but the deadbolt too. Then she checked all the windows in the living room and locked them, even the tiny ones no one could fit through. "Why are you locking everything?" I asked. She gave me this weird smile and said, "Just being careful. You never know who might try to get in." That didn't make sense to me. We lived in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where everyone knew each other. But I didn't question her. I was a kid, and adults were supposed to know better, right? After she locked everything, she sat us down at the kitchen table for dinner. She didn't eat anything herself, just watched us eat. She kept tapping her fingers on the table and glancing over her shoulder, like she was expecting something to happen. Ethan, being only 5, didn't notice anything weird. He was just happy to have spaghetti for dinner, but I couldn't stop feeling uneasy. There was something about the way she kept muttering under her breath. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but it sounded like she was repeating the same phrase over and over. After dinner, things got even weirder. She told us we couldn't watch television. Instead, she made us sit in the living room while she rummaged through her bag. She pulled out this small, worn-out book with a leather cover and some other stuff. A candle, a piece of chalk, and what looked like a bundle of dried sticks tied together with twine. "What's that?" I asked, my voice shaking a little. "It's for your protection," she said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Protection from what?" She didn't answer me. Instead, she started drawing strange symbols on the living room floor with the chalk. Ethan thought it was a game and started giggling, but I felt sick to my stomach. She lit the candle and placed it in the middle of the largest symbol, then held the bundle of sticks over the flame until it started smoking. The smell was awful, like burning hair and something rotten. "Sit here," she said, pointing to the floor next to the candle. "No," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I don't want to." She grabbed my arm, not hard, but firm enough to show she wasn't messing around. "It's for your own good. Sit." Ethan sat down right away, still thinking it was all a game. I hesitated, but eventually sat down too. She started chanting something in a language I didn't understand. Her voice was low and shaky at first, but it got louder and more confident as she went on. The whole time, she kept glancing at the windows and the front door like she was waiting for something to burst in. I was terrified. Ethan must have picked up on my fear, because he stopped laughing and clung to me, his little hands gripping my arm so tightly it hurt. "What are you doing?" I whispered. "Keeping it away," she said without looking at me. "Keeping what away?" She didn't answer. The chanting went on for what felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes. Then she suddenly stopped, blew out the candle, and told us to go to bed. "I'm not tired," I said, hoping she'd let us stay in the living room where the lights were on. "You need to sleep," she said, her voice sharp. "It's safer in your room." I didn't understand how our room could be any safer than the living room, but I didn't argue. I just grabbed Ethan's hand and led him upstairs. Once we were in our room, I locked the door and pushed my dresser in front of it. Ethan thought it was funny and started laughing again, but I was shaking so hard I could barely move. We climbed into bed, and I held him close, listening for any sounds from downstairs. For a while, it was quiet. Then I heard her talking again, her voice low and urgent. It sounded like she was having a conversation with someone, but I never heard another voice respond. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of something shattering. I sat up, heart pounding, and saw the light under our bedroom door flickering like someone was walking back and forth with a candle. I wanted to wake Ethan, but he was sound asleep, so I stayed in bed, too scared to move. Eventually, the light disappeared and everything went quiet again. The next morning, my parents came home like nothing had happened. The babysitter was gone, and they didn't mention anything about her acting strange or breaking anything. When I went downstairs, the living room was spotless. The symbols were gone, and there was no sign of the candle or the bundle of sticks. I never told my parents what happened, and I don't think Ethan even remembers. But sometimes, when I'm home alone at night, I still hear her voice in my head chanting those strange words, and I always make sure the doors and windows are locked, just in case. I had been babysitting for years. It was my go-to side hustle, and I liked it because most of the time it was easy money, popcorn, movies, and bedtime routines. But nothing could have prepared me for the night I spent babysitting for the Reynolds family in their quiet suburban neighborhood in Illinois. It was a crisp fall evening, and I arrived at the Reynolds' home around 6 p.m. The house was lovely, 2 stories with a neatly trimmed lawn and a long driveway. The mom, Amy, was heading to a work gala downtown, and the dad, John, was out of town, leaving me with their 2 kids, Ellie, 6, and Max, 4. They were sweet, well-behaved kids who had already met me during a trial visit the previous weekend. I should be back by midnight, Amy said, as she grabbed her coat. The kids' bedtime is 8 p.m. You have my number if you need anything. I assured her everything would be fine, and with a quick goodbye, she left. The evening started off uneventfully. Ellie and Max were excited to show me their favorite toys, and we spent an hour building Lego towers in the living room. After a dinner of grilled cheese and apple slices, I let them pick a movie. They settled on Toy Story, and by 7:45, Max was already dozing off on the couch. At 8 p.m. sharp, I tucked them both into bed, read them a quick story, and made sure their nightlight was on. The house grew quiet, the kind of silence you only notice when you're alone in an unfamiliar place. I settled onto the couch with my phone, scrolling through social media while keeping an ear out for any noises from upstairs. That's when I heard it, a faint rustling sound outside near the front door. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I remembered there wasn't any wind that night. I dismissed it, telling myself it was probably just a stray cat or a raccoon. But a few minutes later, I heard it again, this time louder. It was the sound of leaves crunching underfoot. Someone was outside. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The front porch light was on, but through the small window next to the door, I couldn't see anyone. Slowly, I got up and crept toward the door, my socks muffling my footsteps. That's when the knock came. It wasn't loud or frantic. It was soft, almost hesitant, like whoever was on the other side didn't want to be heard. I stood there, staring at the door, unsure of what to do. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. I glanced at the clock. It was just past 9. Too late for a casual visitor, and the Reynoldses hadn't mentioned expecting anyone. I decided not to open the door. Instead, I locked the deadbolt and stepped back. My gut told me something wasn't right. A few minutes passed in tense silence. Then I heard a man's voice, muffled but clear enough to make out. "Hey, it's me. I'm here to pick up the kids." My blood ran cold. The Reynoldses hadn't said anything about anyone coming to pick up Ellie and Max. "Who are you?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm their dad," the man replied. "Amy sent me. She said there was an emergency and I needed to come get them." It was a lie. I knew it was a lie because I had met John, the kid's father, the weekend before. This wasn't his voice. "They're asleep," I said, stalling. "Why didn't Amy call me?" "She's busy," the man said quickly. "Just let me in, okay?" "No," I snapped, my fear giving way to anger. "If Amy sent you, she'll call me herself." There was a long pause. Then the man said, "Fine, I'll wait out here." My hands were shaking as I dialed Amy's number. It rang twice before going straight to voicemail. I left a message, trying to sound calm but knowing my voice was betraying me. As I hung up, I heard another sound, this time from the back of the house. Footsteps on the deck. He was trying to get in through the sliding glass door. I sprinted to the kitchen, where the door was, and saw his silhouette through the curtain. He was jiggling the handle, testing it. I grabbed the biggest knife I could find from the drawer and yelled, "Get away from the house! I've called the police!" For a moment, everything went still. Then I heard him laugh, low and menacing. "You're not going to call anyone. he said. But I already had my phone in my hand, dialing 911. The operator stayed on the line with me as I barricaded myself and the kids in Ellie's bedroom. They were awake now, crying softly as I whispered reassurances I didn't believe myself. From the window, I could see the man pacing in the backyard. He wasn't trying to hide anymore. Officers are on their way, the operator told me. Stay where you are. The next 10 minutes felt like an eternity. The man tried the back door again, then moved to one of the windows, tapping on the glass. Let me in, he said, his voice sing-songy now, mocking me. I just want to talk. I held the knife tighter, praying the police would get there before he found a way in. When the red and blue lights finally flashed outside, I nearly cried with relief. The man bolted, disappearing into the shadows just as 2 officers came up the driveway. They searched the area but didn't find him. One of the officers stayed with me until Amy got home, shaken and apologetic. They never found out who he was or why he targeted their house. But I'll never forget his voice, or the way he laughed when I told him I called the police. That night changed me. I still babysit, but I'm more cautious now. I double-check locks, keep my phone closed, and trust my gut when something feels off.